Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
Do you use PowerPoint or similar software when delivering presentations? Are your slides enhancing your talks or making people wish they were somewhere else? Are you unsure how to use slides so they help as opposed to hurt your messages? In this episode, David McBee shares common mistakes speakers made when including slides in their presentations. He shows you how to avoid these mistakes and how you can use slides to help deliver more compelling messages. David McBee is an author, trainer, and professional speaker. He works with sales representatives and business owners around the world, helping them become their best selves. Considered an expert in his field, David is known for his passion, sense of humor, and talent for making the complicated simple. Here's my chat with David McBee. Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
David, this is an episode I've been waiting to do because I believe the vast majority of us can use help with our PowerPoint slides. To begin, what does death by PowerPoint mean to you?
Well, I think that there are a million presenters out there, whether they're professional speakers or someone in a boardroom who just has to present to their 8 employees, who lean way too heavily on their presentation deck. And we can say PowerPoint, for the sake of our interview today, but it could be a keynote, it could be any kind of presentation software, right? And for me, death by PowerPoint is when the PowerPoint could have done the entire job of the speaker, right? You're basically putting up slides and reading them to your attendees, or worse, which we can talk a little bit more about this, is you're paraphrasing what's on the slides because you were told not to read them. But you're basically saying everything that's on the slides, and the slides become the presentation themselves. So that, for me, is what death by PowerPoint is. And obviously, death is an extreme way of describing that. But sometimes when I see a presentation like that, I want to die. So that's where I came up with that term.
Probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was invited to a presentation being given by a professor of communications. And I thought, this is going to rock. This is going to be excellent. For 40 minutes, he had his back to us while he read his slides verbatim.
How'd that make you feel?
Like I wanted to be anywhere else, including getting a root canal.
And no matter how interesting the content is, you're still sitting there going, well, I could have just read this. You could have emailed this document to me and I would have gotten through it in a lot faster than 40 minutes. So the resentment that I think that comes along with that, like you're literally saying to your attendees, you're not smart enough to read, so I'm going to read to you. This is not the elementary school storytelling. This is supposed to be a presentation, not death by PowerPoint.
No, and if I can remember correctly, at least I, and I'm sure just about everybody else, was at the end of each slide when he was about halfway through.
Now, that's the other thing, right? If you've got all the content on the slide and you're reading it, you're not listening to them because you're reading.
Right.
Sometimes I will use slides that have bullets, little things like, I work in the space of connected TV right now. So I'll talk about how connected TV works and the reporting that comes along with a connected TV advertising campaign. And I'll say, well, here's what's available in a report. And it'll be like 6 bullets. I have learned that if I put those 6 bullets up on the slide, people will read them while I'm still talking about the first bullet. And so it's very important to use the animation to only bring up the content you're talking about and not let the attendees read it.
That's key. And you see that quite often as well. And that's exactly what people do.
They do it so often. Or another thing that I see people do is they'll put too much content on a slide, and from the audience, you're straining to even read it, right? Whereas they're afraid of having a deck that is too many slides. But for my money, I can do a 30-minute presentation with 100 slides in it, depending on what I'm trying to accomplish. Because I may have a slide up for like 3 seconds and it's just one word or one phrase. The PowerPoint's job is to support my storytelling. It's not supposed to be the story. It's supposed to support it. So I might have 10 powerful bullets I want to say, and I'll have 10 slides and I'll go, bam, say it, bam, say it, bam, say it. And I'll go through those 10 slides in 10 seconds. I'm not afraid to use 1 billion slides in a presentation if those slides are supporting my story.
I have a past client who had VPs out in Dallas, and she's on the East Coast. There were VPs out in Dallas who were supposed to fly into those meetings, but they always said, you know what, just send us copies of the PowerPoint. They got in touch with her and said, what's this? We have no idea what the meeting was about. We're used to others sending us the slides with everything on it. To me, and tell me if you agree or not, that's what leads to the phrase, they could have emailed this meeting to us. We didn't have to waste all this time.
100%. And I'm glad you brought that up. I actually get asked for my PowerPoint decks quite a bit. At my job, I create at least a webinar per month. And I put the webinars into an LMS for people to download them if they want them. But I also include the transcript, because my webinars don't make, or my PowerPoints don't make any sense without my story behind them. I told you I talk about connected TV quite a bit, and that's kind of top of mind for me right now. One of the points that I try to make when I'm telling my story is that people discover new content on their streaming TV devices by using the voice search feature on their remote, right? So if you have an Apple TV or an Amazon, you might say, you know what, I want to watch The Terminator, but you don't know if it's on Netflix or Disney Plus or HBO Max. So you just grab the remote and you go, The Terminator. And then it brings it up and tells you where it's at. Well, one of the things that happens is sometimes when you do that, you'll discover a whole new app or a whole new channel that you didn't even know existed, right? Like The Terminator is on Pluto TV. You're like, I never heard of Pluto TV, but you click it and you watch it. So I have to tell this story in my presentations quite a bit. And you know what's on the screen behind me when I'm doing that, or the screen if I'm doing it virtually? It's the button with the microphone. That's all that's there. It's just a reminder to me to tell the story. And it's a visual that the learner can associate with that story. So the next time they look at their remote control and they see that button, they go, oh yeah, I remember this is how people discover new content on CTV. But if I were to email you that PowerPoint, you'd be like, what is this? It's a microphone icon. What does this have to do with anything, right? For my money, if you can read it, if you can email it, you've done your attendees a disservice, because they are tuning in to hear you tell a story. And I'm sure your other guests have all talked about the value and importance of storytelling in public speaking, right?
Definitely.
But the PowerPoint that goes along with that story just needs to be an image sometimes, or a word or a phrase that keys you up to tell the story.
I often think of it as a children's book where it has the story and then it has an image that the child looks at and goes, I get it.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Tell me more. That's how I see PowerPoint helping stories.
And you know who was the king of it, right? And Apple still tries to be, but Steve Jobs always did that.
Oh.
You know, you'd see him come out and do one of his presentations, and there'd be nothing on the screen behind him except an image of an app or the iPhone or the words iPhone 8 or whatever it might be. But there's very little content on that enormous screen, but it's just enough to remind him what story to tell and to enhance the story.
So why do you think so many people do it the way we were just talking about, as opposed to Steve Jobs' way?
Well, I think that's what they've seen over and over and over. It's been done wrong so many times by so many people that is what they're used to, or they don't know. They have to give a presentation about a new product or service that the company is rolling out. And all they know is to list the features and benefits of that product. Whereas I think you need to tell a story about the product. And then even if you have a list of features, right? Let's say you have a list of 12 features, make that 12 slides. And each slide is either an image that is associated with the feature or benefit, or a word or a phrase. But now the word comes up on the screen and say, well, the word is Wi-Fi. And the reason this is important to our story is because we use Wi-Fi in this way, or whatever it might be.
I'm going to tell you about a presentation I saw, and I'd like to get your opinion on it.
Okay.
It was given by the executive director of a charity, and this charity helps homeless youths. Their executive director, when she was giving this presentation, included numerous slides, and each one was chock full of numbers. I mean, incredible. Year over year, donations, whatever it was, just number after number. My thought was that given the nature of what they do, that there could have been more compelling slides. What would be your thought?
That sounds to me like the overall story needed to be rewritten, right? If those statistics are important to the story, then by all means, have a giant 86% of statistics are made up, or whatever the stat is, right? That can be powerful. In fact, I've been doing that a lot lately as I talk about the consumption of connected TV, and I've started to keep going back to that, but that's kind of my world, right? There's a lot of statistics that go along with it. So I'll throw the stat out there, and on my screen is just the stat. And then after I'm done with the stat, I'll explain why that stat is relevant. So maybe the stat and a story to go along with it would have been more powerful. But I can't think of many instances where a dozen stats in a row that are just stats would be interesting to anyone, honestly. You've got to say, here's the stat and here's why it's important to our story, I think.
I was thinking when I was sitting there, half bored to tears. And again, it's a subject matter that pulls on your heartstrings. You shouldn't be bored to tears. And all I thought was, show me the image of a 12-year-old girl living in a car.
That would be much more powerful, wouldn't it?
So much more powerful than all these numbers up there.
Well, maybe the number or the stat is something like, we helped 312 teenagers this year go from living in a car to living in apartments or housing. Well, that's your image of a girl living in a car, and the stat goes with it. The stat doesn't have to be on the screen. You can say the stat with the image being much more powerful.
PowerPoint, Keynote, any of them, have a gazillion different features, options, all different things you can do. And you see so many people use these. What's your thought on that?
Well, there's another presentation where you zoom in and it goes away. And
Prezi.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Prezi, right. Okay. So I used Prezi several years ago, and I remember getting off the stage and people would come up to me, and it was when Prezi was brand new, like, that was so cool, the way the technology moved around. But they were so focused on how cool the presentation was that no one was talking about the presentation itself. It wasn't, oh, well, I learned something that's really going to help my business grow. It was, that presentation was so cool, the way it moved. And I remember going home and going, all right, I'm not using that again. Or if I do, I'm not going to put all the bells and whistles into it, because those things can be helpful, a simple animation, but it can also be incredibly distracting, right? Even just going from slide to slide. When I was first playing around with PowerPoint and learning those things, I really liked some of the swipe to the left and swipe up and the zoom in or flying in. But now I just basically stick with fade. I just fade from one to the other because I don't want the animations and the fancy tools that are available to take away from my story. And I guess that leads to another thing, which is like, the theme of the presentation needs to be simple and elegant and consistent. How many times have you seen someone use 18 different fonts, 47 different colors, and just there's no consistency to it. It's really popular right now to throw a GIF or a GIF, however you want to pronounce it, into a presentation. And I can get into that. It adds a little levity to the presentation, but I don't like it when people just throw clip art on a screen or a little square of a GIF. I think it looks so unprofessional. I think everything should have a theme, stick with a handful of colors, handful of fonts. And if you're using imagery, it should either take up the entire screen or it should have a border around it or something. Just don't clip crap and just paste it. It just looks unprofessional. And I think people who do that, they know that, but they don't know how to do it any other way. So the key is to leverage themes, I think. And if the theme has a certain animation in it, then use it consistently, but don't use more than a few.
I was working with a salesperson recently, and he showed me the deck that the company gives them to present in front of the prospects.
Uh-huh.
And I said, what are your reactions from your prospects? He goes, I can't tell you how often, if I have the CEO and the CFO and the CMO and any other C-level there, that the CEO, after about 5 minutes, gets up and says, Susan, you've got this. Let me know what you think later on, and leaves. And he said, why do you think that is? I said, you're boring these guys. They're bored. This isn't about them. This is about the company. You're telling them about your 27 offices, of which they'll have nothing to do with 26 of them. And you're telling them about all these different things. And I said, and look how cluttered it is. And when I said that, he said to me, one high-ranking individual in a prospects company looked at me and said, why do you have our logo on every single slide? And the guy says, well, I'm presenting to you. And he says, we know who we are.
That's pretty good.
I said, so why are your logos still on the slides? The company won't let us take them off. Nor theirs. Theirs is on there as well.
It might make more sense to have on the opening slide, presentation custom created for, maybe you toss their logo there, right? To show that the entire presentation that they're about to see is customized to them, which it's probably not. Realistically, it's probably cut and paste the whole thing, and then you just change that one slide, which is unfortunate. But I mean, now you're talking about something entirely different. Like in a public speaking environment, you've got attendees sitting there wanting to hear your stories.
Right.
In that sample, you're talking about a sales rep with a presentation deck. And if that presentation deck is all about their own company, yeah, they're going to bore them to death.
So many of them are.
Yeah. I used to sell quite a bit using a presentation deck, and I got away from it when I realized that I would do much better if I leveraged my ears than my mouth by asking the right questions about the business's goals and what they were trying to accomplish. And then I might come back with a presentation deck, but that deck would say, here's your goal, and here's how we're going to achieve that goal, right? It really was customized to them. So yeah, any deck that just talks about you, it's like, hey, go on a date and talk about yourself the entire time. Let's see if you're going home alone, right?
Exactly.
You've got to ask questions in that environment.
In the end, David, do our listeners even need to use PowerPoint?
Again, it depends on the goal, right? In a sales pitch, if you can tell the story of the sales pitch without a deck, then I say no. If you are giving a public speech, and a lot of TED Talks, they'll get up there, there'll be nothing behind them except the TEDx like sign, and it's just them talking. And if you're a dynamic speaker and you can tell your stories effectively without a PowerPoint, no, you don't need one. But once in a while, if you have to quote somebody, and by the way, that's the only time I would ever read from a PowerPoint deck is if I'm quoting someone and I want to get it word for word. Or if you want that image of the 12-year-old girl who's homeless, like if that can positively impact your story, then yeah. In my world, we say that video is more powerful than banner ads or display ads because video comes with sight, sound, motion, and emotion. You can do a presentation all day long without visuals behind you. But sometimes those visuals can really help amplify the visual, the sight, sound, motion, and emotion. They can help bring those things home. It's going to be different for every speaker. There's no right or wrong answer. Wait, here's a good answer for you, Peter. In writing, most writers write way too much. I know when I wrote my first book, my editor was like, "That's redundant. You're saying the same thing again and again, and you're making this 10 word sentence into 30 words for no reason. Like, here's the point of the sentence, just write that." And she gave me the advice. She said, think about how you tweet. Back then, when it was only 140 characters, you had to be really thoughtful about how you use those 140 characters to tell your story, right? If a public speaker were to take that same logic and apply it to their PowerPoint deck, what's the least amount of visualization that you need to tell this story? Then I think that's going to get away from the death by PowerPoint. It's going to be 12 pictures or 12 big slides with big words. Or if it's a long presentation, it might be a lot, but they're just brief and powerful when they show up.
Often that's what presentations are. It's not what we add, it's what we pare back.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I remind my clients of this, I say, the statue of David is not a block of granite. It's what was taken away from that block of granite that left us with David.
That's good. Yeah.
And I see that the same as what you're saying here with words and with visuals. Pare back.
Yeah, maybe you build the entire deck the way you always have, and then you say, okay, what can I cut away? What granite can I cut away? What can I just the minimal amount of visualization to tell my story? Here's the big takeaway. Like, if you can email your PowerPoint deck and people can make sense of it, you need to start over. We really want people to look at a PowerPoint deck and go, what does this even mean? I had a buddy ask another buddy once to do a presentation on his behalf because his plane got canceled or something. He couldn't make it, right? One of the PowerPoint deck's slides came up and it was a jar of mayonnaise. And I know that when he built that deck, he knew what that was. That was a key to a story. But the guy giving the presentation goes, and here's a jar of mayonnaise. And he just went to the next slide, right? But I think that's great. I think a jar of mayonnaise can be a powerful visual if it's used effectively to tell a story instead of 12 bullets that are just something you could read.
David, thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts and expertise with our audience. Where can our listeners learn more about you and your services?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find. I've been in the world of search engine optimization for almost 20 years. So if you Google David McBee, you will find me. I pretty much own those search results. And for this particular presentation, I would challenge people to go to my YouTube. Go to youtube.com/David McBee. I think that they'll see some of the presentations that I have up there. They utilize these strategies that we've discussed today and can serve as a good visual example of what we've talked about.
David, thanks so much for being here.
This was so much fun. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.